So why do we want diversity? So basically, we want diversity because it pays off. It also pays off literally. So if we have diversity in organization, there's research that shows that we actually have better financial returns. So we make more money in the company. It helps our overall business strategy because we make more diverse products when we have more diverse people. And we've seen examples of why that where things happen when we don't have the diversity, where things are not taken into account. So examples can be that for many, many years, centuries actually, cameras were not very good at taking pictures of anyone except white people or people with very fair skin, because those were the ones buying it. And as they were developing the products and the films, they were working with white people. And that has a that there's a different color to it, a different color to the skin, which meant that as we luckily started having more equality on that level, and black people, people of color could go in and buy cameras, it was not targeted at them at all, which meant that because of the difference in the light of the skin, the pictures would not be good. And we see this over in a lot of places. So to make better products and to reach a higher market or a bigger market, we also need diversity. There's also a part about the image and brand. And I think some of the things we are seeing in the world now is that the brand becomes more and more important. Where earlier a lot of people might have picked a job to get money, now we are picking a job to actually be in a place that we believe in. It also creates a better working environment when we have diverse people, and it creates better products, like I said. We see this in not just when it comes to the color of our skin, we see this with gender, for instance, where things are not targeted at women or people who are non binary, because the people producing this have not even considered these things. So I was reading up on diversity because this is something I care very much about. I believe we are all equal and that we need equal possibilities. And while I was looking at this, I found this article from Catherine Phillips, who says that being around people who are different from us makes us more creative, more diligent, and harder working. So basically, it makes us smarter at our work and it makes us stay on our toes. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's easier, because it's so much easier to make decisions if you have six people who are the same when you have people who are different. So I think that's kind of like it keeps us on our toes and it helps us have those creative ideas because we get different kinds of brains. So when we look at diversity, we have a lot of different things. There's internal diversity. So internal diversity is stuff that we are born with. It is the color of our skin. It is the gender we are assigned. It is the sexuality that we have. It's the nationality that we have when we are born. And all of these are things that we cannot change. Whereas external diversity is like the other things, like, for instance, um, it can be political beliefs. It can be thing, things like how you look, which religion you have, the citizenship, um, what relations are you in. All of these are things that characterize us, but they're also things that we can change, whereas the internal diversity are things we cannot. And then there's organizational diversity. So organizational diversity is about what role do you have in the organization? What is the pay? What is the management status? And then the last one that they talk about in the McKinsey report that I'm linking to is the world view diversity. So here we are talking about political beliefs, moral compasses, stuff like that, which are some people would maybe put under external diversity, but they choose to put it here. And we need all of these kinds of diversity, and we need them in different settings. So if we look at the organizational diversity, for instance, we have better teams when we have different roles in there. We might not have a better team if we have different management status, because then all of a sudden we create a hierarchy in there. But all of these things kind of add to the blend and help us create a diverse. So one of the things that has happened in our organizations and in our industry is that we have been working towards diverse. But what we've also done is we forgot a little bit about being inclusive. So while diversity is about us being different, inclusion is about people being there on their own terms. So, as an example here, this is one of my friends from when she was starting out as a manager, where if she dressed like a woman would normally dress, she would not get the respect. So she actually started wearing suits to work. So if we don't have inclusion, what we're going to do is we're going to create clones of what we already have. And then we are not going to get the benefits of the diversity that we put in. And we see this all the time. We see in the US, for instance, where Black people need to flatten their hair in a lot of places. So as late as 2019, a law came out in California that you cannot discriminate based on ethnic hair, for instance. And up until that point, it was okay to discriminate in a workplace or send a kid home from school because they had curly hair. So a lot of what we also do in our industry is we talk about diversity, but what we really need to talk about is inclusion. Because if we don't bring in all of these different aspects, then it doesn't matter if we are diverse. What we also see is that because of this and because of the way we sometimes treat people in our industry, the people who are diverse very often also disappear again. So a lot of people talk about we have a pipeline problem. We don't have enough women who apply in IT. We don't have enough people of different ethnicity applying in IT. But that's only part of the problem, because a huge part of the other side is that a lot of women actually leave the industry. A lot of people of different sexual orientation than being straight cis are leaving the industry because they're bullied. So we are missing out on all of these things because we are not necessarily being inclusive. So Amy Edmondson has been doing a lot of research on psychological safety, and this is one way of describing what it is. It is the belief that the work environment is safe for taking interpersonal risks, meaning we can interact with each other in different ways. So while I also talked, I'm just going to rewind. While I already talked about that diversity is important for how much money we make for the product, there's also a part about moving to the future. So the interesting thing about the future is that we don't know it. This might be Abraham Lincoln. I say maybe because a lot of the quotes online that says Abraham Lincoln, I mean, he must have done other stuff than write quotes for the internet. But he talks about the best way to predict the future is to create it. So we need to create the future that we want. And this is from a Danish philosopher, Søren Kierkegaard, who says, life can only be understood backwards, but must be lived forwards. So we need to move ahead, but we also need to learn from the past. And the way we can do this is we can look into building organizations that are more resilient. So basically, what we need in the future is we need learning organizations. We need organizations that are able to adapt. We need organizations that have a lot of innovation, that create new things, because we don't know what the future will bring us. We can look back and say what the past brought us, but we don't know about the future. It's all guesses. And then we need to build resilience, because there are so many changes happening. And because of all these changes happening, we are going to need to be able to act in this. We need to be able to be resilient to change. It doesn't mean that Changes are always going to be fun, no matter how resilient we are. But we need to learn how to act in this and react to things, because if there's one thing we know is that we don't know what's going to happen in the future. And to be able to do this, we need great leaders and we need great teams, because that's the way we can create these organizations. So some of you might have heard this term VUCA. It actually started from the military in the US, but is now being used about organizations. That more and more of our organizations are moving towards VUCA. It means volatile, that things are fluctuating. It's uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen. It's very complex and it's ambiguous. So things might change all the time. And for to be able to survive in this, we need psychological safety, because by having that safety, we can start taking the chances, making the risks. And part of that will also help us include people more. So psychological safety is not something new. The first research that I found about this is from 1965, where Shine and Bennis looked into what creates a really good learning environment. And what they found was that to be in a good learning environment, and it might need to be a bit uncomfortable, because learning new things is a little bit uncomfortable. But the difference between people having anxiety and people feeling safe is to have psychological safety. And despite this, it hasn't been something that's been the focus of our industry, or other industries for that matter, for a very long time. But in the 1990s, Khan started looking into these things as well and starting doing more research. And recently, we have the luck that in the IT industry, Google has started looking into this. So in 2014, they did Project Aristotle to figure out what is it actually that creates high performing teams. And one of the things they found, the most significant thing they found, was psychological safety. We also see within Agile that we have modern Agile. As far as I can tell, it started around 2016, where they talk about making safety a prerequisite, that the foundation of everything we do is to have safety. So how do we actually define psychological safety? So I like to use this one, which is from William Kahn's work, which talks about that psychological safety is being able to show and employ oneself without fear of negative consequence of self-image, status, or career. And there are several things in this that are interesting. One is that it's about fear or not having fear, which also means that psychological safety is something that's inside us and something that we need to work with together to figure out what it means to us. Because what feels safe to me might not feel safe to you. On the contrary. So we need to have a discussion about this. Whereas with physical safety, we can say, okay, there's a stairs here. We need a banister so we can walk down of this. Um, there's also the part about the consequences. So the things that we fear are not just stuff like being fired, but it can also being bullied. It can be losing your status. That, oh, if I ask this many questions, what happens? Are people going to look at me differently? Or even your self-image. And when we have the safety, we are not afraid of this, and we can come in and we can show ourselves and we can employ ourselves. And showing ourselves, being who we are, is a huge part of creating inclusion in companies. The way I interpret employing yourself is that using all the skills you have, not just the skills that you learn from university, but all of the skills. So for modern agile, the definition that I sometimes work with, especially if I work with teams, is where he talks about not being afraid to be yourself. So being yourself, being who you are, which can be really hard, especially if you are different from the rest. So what some companies do, I know that Spotify, for instance, has done this in the US, is to try to have two of the kind of people who are different from the rest. So for instance, two people of color or two women, so that they don't feel totally alone. And the other alternative is to continuously build a organization, team, society where we can actually be who we are. And the other parts of this is about raising problems. If you see something, do you actually speak about it? Do you dare take risks? And taking risks and raising problems is a huge part of being innovative, because a lot of the things we find with innovation is because we take small risks. Amy Edmondson talks about how we can look at what are the things that we can prevent. Like in engineering, can she doesn't talk about engineering, I talk about engineering. Can we make automating test frameworks so that we actually know that that part of the quality is okay, and then we can spend our energy on taking risk on trying new features, for instance. It's about not being afraid to disagree or ask these questions or make mistakes. We all make mistakes. That's why we have backspace on the computer. But how can we um, feel safe enough to not hide these things? So when Amy Edmondson started discovering these things, she was looking into medical errors in a hospital. And her research showed that the part with the best working environment had the most medical errors. But really, what it was that they were the only ones who were safe enough to report all the errors. So we do have all these things, but if we don't feel safe, we will hide these things. And a really good example is this from Boeing. So Boeing built the 787, and there were a lot of things that were problems with this. But people were fired or bullied if they were raising concerns. And what happened, as most people know now, is that two planes fell down. We didn't even do anything about. They didn't even stop this until the second plane fell down. And as they are diving more and more into this, they realized that there were so many problems with the plane. There were software, there were hardware problems, but people were afraid to speak up. So literally in this case, psychological safety or lack of it cost lives, a lot of lives, not just the lives of people in the company who might lose their job, but people died from the plane falling down. An important thing to remember about safety is that it's not always comfortable. Safety helps us be in uncomfortable situations. If you are the only one in a group who disagrees, for instance, it's not going to be necessarily be comfortable to say, I actually don't agree. There are some things here we need to look into. Um, if you make a mistake, like I had a friend who works at Spotify who once took all of Spotify down in the early years. That was not very comfortable, but it was safe. They could go in, they could look at these things. So, very often, one of the things that psychological safety can do for us is to help us be in these uncomfortable situations. And I use the word uncomfortable very deliberately because we don't want to be in situations where it's panic because or dangerous, because then it's not safe. So going back to teams, and what Google found out with their Aristotle project was that to be able to have really good projects and high performing teams, the most important thing you need is psychological safety. But what you also need is meaningful work. People need to know that the work that they're doing actually have a meaning. Um, that's one of the indicators of having high performing teams. The team needs to be dependable, meaning that they will say when they are doing things, but also if something goes wrong, they will inform the stakeholders early. They will not wait until it's almost the deadline and say, oh, by the way, we can't do this. There's also structure and clarity. People in the teams know their roles, they know what expectations are on them, and they know how to act. And the last part is about knowing what impact their work actually has. So what they're doing in their team, what impact does that have on the company or on the product that they're working on? But the thing that was the single most important thing was the psychological safety. If we then look into leadership on the other side, I believe that the leadership we need to be able to live in these organizations that are VUCA and where things change, if we want to be resilient, we need leaders who are not afraid to take part of the traditional leadership, to set a vision. Where are we going? To set those expectations that help people know what the structure is in their team. To take power, to step into power, but not power as in I'm the one deciding everything, but power in I am the one who makes the final decision. And some decisions you can make and some decisions I can make, but making that clear. And also the part about growing organizations. So these are all parts of um, what we need. But then we also need the parts from the other side. And what I see sometimes is that we tip to one side or the other. So if you tip to the blue side, you will be talking about, telling people what to do, being very directive. That is not good for motivation. But on the other hand, if we go to the pink side where we talk about caring for people, having autonomy, setting a frame within which people can act, having empathy for people, and being vulnerable as a leader, one of the most important things you can do as a leader is to show that you make mistakes. But if we go too much on this side, we're not going to go anywhere because we need someone to set the expectation. We need someone to have those visions. And by combining these two, like high performing teams and this kind of leadership, we can create organizations that will help us in the future and organizations where we can be more inclusive. And some people say, do we really need all this? And this is a quote from my friend Torbjörn. He says, things become better when we accept them as they are, not as we want them to be. That doesn't mean that we just accept everything, but it means that to be able to change things, to be able to move, we need to accept things as they are right now. If we want to have a diverse organization, and if we say, yeah, but women should just apply, that doesn't help. If we make a realization is that, okay, every time we have a job ad out, we only get applications from white males. Maybe we are doing something different. We need to accept that things are as they are, and then we can start changing them. And yes, we need the psychological safety because a lot of it, you can say, of course, people need to treat each other nicely. Of course, you need to be able to speak up. But that's just not how it is. And that's why we need to work on it in organizations. So, how can we actually create this safety? So, this first one is from Amy Edmondson, where she talks about going into organizations and looking at different domains. What is our attitude to risk and failure? Are we open to failing? Are we open to taking risks? Not meaning that we just risk everything or we make huge mistakes, but how do we act when something happens? How do we act when there is failure? I remember some years ago in organizations, we had the whole zero fault culture. And the problem with that is that we can never have zero faults. So, what is the attitude that the organization has for this? What is the willingness in the organization to help? Do people step up? Do they need to be asked to help? Will they help if you are asked? How can we create an organization that has a huge, large willingness to help? Can we have open conversations? Can we discuss things, or are conversations shut down? So creating an organization where we have these things, and then actually inclusion and diversity. So it's kind of interesting. By having safety, we get more inclusion and diversity, and by having more inclusion. Is someone saying something?
No, no, you can continue, Gitte.
No,
Okay, I just heard something.
just
Um, so these are some of the things we can look in. How do we create this in our organization? And she very much talks to leaders as well. How can we, as a leader, create safety? And when I say leader, I don't just mean management. I also mean people who are the ones stepping up, the ones, it can be by status, but it can also just be who's the one who always steps up if somebody needs help. Those are leaders by example. And one of the things you can do as a leader is you can frame work as learning. What we are doing in software is not producing the same thing over and over and over and over again. we are actually learning things. We are figuring out how can we create a new thing? How can we use this new technology? How can we help the client with what they want? One of my friends used to say, there's two things we know for sure in IT. People don't know what they want, and we don't know how long it's going to take. Um, which means that we are learning all the time. And as a leader, if you frame things as learning, you will help create safety. And then model that curiosity. Be curious about people. So if somebody says, oh, I believe in this other thing. So instead of saying, well, that's totally wrong, going in and like, oh, that's interesting. Can you tell me more about this thing? Model that curiosity. Be curious about people and show fallibility. Show that you also make mistakes. Show that, okay, yes, I, as a, as a speaker here, I'm also a leader because you're listening to me. I should have logged on earlier to test my technology as was actually requested by the organizers. And I was like, no, I've been on Hopin before. That was wrong of me. And by showing you that I can be wrong as well, I'm also showing that this is okay. And this is part of what we do as leaders, no matter what form we are, whether it's a role model, a manager, or someone just doing stuff. We can show these things and we can show that we make mistakes. And then there's kind of like more, what have I seen to help create safety? Setting the clear expectations. So one of the things that we see in the Aristotle project is that people need some kind of, what is the structure? What is the expectations to us? And we very often have expectations on each other, but we don't go in and set these expectations. We don't say them out loud. So one of the things you can work with in an organization, if you don't have that, is to set clear expectations. Not that expectations can't be challenged, because they should be able to, but you can always go in and see, okay, this is what's expected of me. Is this something I can live up to? Yes, it is. So now I know that this is what I need to do. And then within that frame, I can do what I need to do. And then you need to listen. A lot of the time, we listen to respond. We are waiting to respond on something, when some of the stuff we could do is listen to understand people. And by listening to people, understanding them, we we learn more about them. We learn more about what's going on, and they feel seen. They feel that they can be who they are. And we need to care properly. By caring about the people we surround us with, we can also help create safety. We can give and we can receive feedback, because we are so different. Like, I'm in an organization of 220 people. We have 41 nationalities, I think, last time I counted. We have very, very different cultures. And if we don't talk about things like that, even, then we cannot create the safety. So one example is that for instance, I just got a really cool new Brazilian colleague, and people from Brazil that I have met are very um, warm, and they hug people or they kiss on the cheek. In the northern countries where I'm from, it's kind of like, no, don't come near me. So even that culture, which is a sign of affection, can be something that people can react to. And if we don't have a safe environment where we can say, okay, that was a little bit too close, uh, then I might feel unsafe. In this case, it's not a problem, because I am not a traditional Nordic person. I do like to hug, I do kiss on the cheek. But it's an example of just the small things that can happen in an organization that can make you feel like you can't be yourself. And that it's also important how you give this, because if I would just say to my friend Evandro, oh, stay away from me, I don't like you getting so close, that's not helpful. I need to talk to him in a good way, because what he is always okay. It might not be okay that he steps too close, but who he is always okay.
Sorry, Gitte, to interrupt you.
Yeah.
You don't have any more time, so
Okay.
if
I'll
you,
jump to the wrap up.
if you okay, that's
Uh,
fine. Thank you.
uh, diversity and inclusion pays off. Psychological safety helps us include. It is very important, but it's also hard. And it doesn't always mean comfort. And we are all part of doing this. And it takes time, it takes an effort, but it's totally worth it. And you can do something no matter what your role are. You can do something to include people. You can do something to make people feel safe. I only skipped 2 slides. My information is here if you want to contact me later. And there are links to the stuff that that I've been talking about as well.